tax the rich less. There'd be more available. More money means more for everyone. And I think, okay, if we just tax the rich less, it'll trickle down to everyone and everybody will benefit. But we've tried that, and what do we end up seeing usually is the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And so I keep wanting to point the finger at other people. Maybe if you're jaded, or if you've had a rough time, maybe just the way you were raised or your experience, maybe even if you came from poverty and dug yourself out and now you're doing okay, maybe you'll look at the situation in a place like the Hokie and you'll say, you know what? This is their fault. The American way is we pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. If they don't get out of it, that's their own problem. If they weren't so lazy, if they just worked harder, then they would get out. But then you start to realize that can't be true. Look at the resources. Look at the things that they have compared to what somebody else has. How do I expect a young kid to dream and have hopes that he could be a tech billionaire someday when his school doesn't have internet? Like, how is he supposed to really believe there is an American dream for him? So far, I've pointed the finger at anybody else but myself. It's my government's problem. It's their problem. But what would Jesus say if he was encountered with this disparity, this gap, this wealth inequality? Well, it won't come to surprise you that this is nothing new. There were poor and there were rich in Jesus' day. There were people who dined at the finest feasts, and there were others who ate the scraps from the garbage. And Jesus did talk about it. In fact, he shared a parable about how we should react to things like this. How we should look at the world. And that instead of blaming other people and looking for social programs or all these other things, we should first look at ourselves and ask, what can I do? What have I been given to help other people? The story, the parable we're going to look at today is the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. It's found in Luke chapter 16. And Jesus begins this parable by laying out the exact story I just laid out to you. It's different characters, it's different people, it's a different time, but it's the same idea. So let's read verses 19 through 21. It says, "There was a rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen, and who feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate was laid a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who desired to be fed with what fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, even the dogs came and licked his sores." This is wealth inequality. This is a fictional story that Jesus tells, but this is the only parable that Jesus ever tells where he gives a character a name. Every other parable, it's just there was a man, or there was a person, or there was a Samaritan, or there was something. This parable, he names the poor man. Which, for one, could make us think, okay, Jesus really liked this poor man. Maybe this is a real person Jesus knew. Maybe he's telling the story of a man that lived in their town. But the reality is, this is probably a parable. This is probably just a story that Jesus was making up. But it's not hard to believe. It's not hard to imagine in our world that there could be someone feasting sumptuously from their table and someone else outside their door dying of starvation. Lazarus, his name means God helps. And I think it's a hint for what this parable is really all about. I think we're supposed to realize that in the end, we need God's help. But we get these two pictures of conflicting wealth and poverty. You have this rich man, and he's living kind of the luxurious life. It says he feasts sumptuously. It means he's got everything he needs. He sits down at his meal table, and it's good. It's like Thanksgiving every day, right? Like, I feast sumptuously on Thanksgiving. That's a day where no matter what my diet looks like, it's ruined for that day. I go into it thinking, listen, as Americans, do you not consider wearing baggy pants on Thanksgiving? We prepare to feast sumptuously. This guy feasts sumptuously every day. It says that he's dressed in purple linen. Those were both signals of royalty. Purple is not a color that appears very much in nature. You don't see, other than like in Minecraft, you won't see purple sheep walking around that you can just shear and make into an outfit. To get the color purple, there was one way to do it. You had to go dive deep into the ocean and find these sea snails that excreted a purple dye. It was a very expensive process to get, and it was even more expensive to buy. So this man had wealth upon wealth. He had the best of things. And outside his gate sat Lazarus. And when we know a few things about Lazarus, first off, it says that he was laid at the gate of the rich man. He didn't go there himself. Someone took mercy on him and put him there every day. Maybe he had some friends who dragged him out. It reminds us of the story when Jesus was preaching and a man's friends dug a hole in someone's roof and lowered their crippled friend down to see Jesus. There are times in our lives where we can't do it on our own. We need other people to help us. And again, that doesn't sound like the American way, right? Like we're supposed to do everything ourselves. We're supposed to be strong and independent. But sometimes we have to let other people help us. Lazarus, it tells us, is covered with sores and being licked by dogs. This was a symbol of his uncleanliness. To have open wounds meant nobody could touch him without risking being infected by his uncleanliness. So people would avoid him. They would walk on the other side of the street. They would step away because they didn't want to risk becoming impure or unclean by associating with him. And as sad as this might make us, these dogs were not pets. Jews did not consider dogs an animal that you bring into your home. They were considered an unclean animal. They went around and they ate trash and they do the things that dogs do. My dog has done some really weird things in our backyard. And I think, gross. Well, they would see that and they go, you don't bring that into your home. That dog is not going to sleep in your bed. They're not going to sit on your couch. Courtney, no, we should outlaw this. It's gross. No, I love Lola. My dog's the best. She's perfect. No. But to be licked by these animals is not like some kind of mercy. It's, look at how unclean this man is. Even the unclean animals are licking him. It says that he desires the scraps from the table of the rich man. And we think of this initially as us, we think just the food that you accidentally dropped. But that's not what they're talking about. In Jesus' day, napkins weren't really a thing. Okay? They didn't have a way to clean them, so they didn't use them. You would wash your hands after the meal, but the rich had a workaround. They had this kind of process where they would have bread on their table, and that bread was simply there for you to wipe your hands with. You would take that bread, you rip off a piece, and you could wipe off the grease from the food that you'd just eaten, the fish or the chicken, not this pig. And you could throw it on the floor. There were people in Jesus' day begging for bread, and there were other people wiping their hands with it. This is how big the gap between the haves and the have-nots was. And so Lazarus, in his intense hunger, in his intense poverty, he looks at that filthy, hand-wiped bread and wants that to fill him. Now, there's another thing that's happening in this parable that if we're not careful, we'll totally miss. And that is, there's an underlying assumption that Jesus' readers would have when they heard this story being laid out. There was an idea that came from many, many years of misunderstanding and misusing Scripture that said that wealth equals blessing. That if you are doing the right things and you are living the right way, the reward for that is wealth. And now we know Jesus. Most of us here have heard some stories of Jesus. We've heard some parables. We've heard Jesus talk. We're pretty aware of what Jesus is about to do. Okay? We know there's a twist coming. And we're all ready for it. But for them, as they hear the story laid out, they are not thinking, oh, poor Lazarus. They're thinking, well, the rich man is righteous, and he got what he deserves, and the poor man obviously lived a sinful life, and this is the payment for his sinfulness. You get what you get. That was their theology. That was their idea. Because they had taken Scriptures out of context. When God had promised that he would take care of the city, the people, the community of Jerusalem, and if they followed his ways, that he would guide them and protect them and give them peace. And they applied it to individuals. It was a promise for one community at one time in one part of history. And they had taken that and they had applied it to all of us. And if we're good, if we obey, then the results of obeying is that God will just shower money on us. He'll shower us with health. He'll shower us with good things. And we'll never have to struggle. But if they had really read Scripture, if they really understood, they would have read books like Job and realized that sometimes even the righteous encounter hard times. Sometimes even good people lose everything. And it's not because God does not love them. It's not because God does not care for them. It's not because they haven't been praying the right prayers or doing the right things. It's because this world is marred by sin. And that there is still abundant blessing outside of what your wallet can hold. This is still sometimes taught today. We have churches that preach a prosperity gospel. If you are good, you will be blessed. If you are not good enough, if your life is not resulting in the blessings you want, it's because you are not doing something right. And if you just pray more, if you just read more, if you just trust more, if you just give more, then God will just keep giving it back to you. And for some of us, we have believed this, and we have given and given, and we have tried and tried, and we have fought, and the diagnosis still came. And we're crushed. Because the only answer is that that's not true, and we've been wasting our time, or we're still not good enough. And no matter how hard we try, we just can't make God happy. That's a terrible place to be. But Jesus knows this assumption. He knows that's what his listeners are thinking. And he immediately addresses it as we go into the next section. In verse 22, he shares with us that it doesn't matter in life what you have or don't have. What matters is your eternal destination. That's what matters. That's the abundant life that Jesus offers. Listen to what he said. The poor man died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. And in Hades, being in torment, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham far off and Lazarus at his side. And he called out, Father, Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in anguish in this flame. But Abraham said, Child, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner his bad things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in anguish. And besides all this, between us and you is a great chasm that has been fixed. And in order that those who would pass from here to you may not be able, and none may cross from there to us. It has been said that death is the great equalizer. Doesn't matter how much money you have, someday you will die. Doesn't matter how good you are, someday you will die. There's a Latin phrase, a dead language, ironically, that says, memento mori. Remember that you must die. They would repeat that to each other. Remember that you must die. It's the great equalizer. Everyone will come to a point where their life will end. You can fight and fight and fight against it. You can build up your walls. You can build up your castle. You can have all the food and the wealth. You can stick to all the best diet plans. You can hire the best health experts and doctors. You can do everything you can to fight against it, but someday it will come. Now, in this parable, we get this sort of a picture of heaven and hell. And it's not, I want to just point out real quick, the point of this parable is not to give us a full theology of heaven and hell. Okay, Jesus was not trying to map out exactly what heaven and hell is going to look like. He's telling a story. And so it's important that we don't base our entire theology of what heaven and hell will be like on this parable alone. And that we take all of Scripture into account. But what we know from Scripture is that in the end, every person will be held accountable for their life. And they will end up either close to God or very, very far from Him. The other thing we know is that no one is sent to hell. Everyone who goes chooses it for themselves. You spend your life rejecting God and rejecting His ways. In the end, eventually, when this life has come and all things are made equal, God will not force you into His presence. He will give you what you spent your life saying, I don't want anything to do with it. But if you seek after Him and you fight for Him, it doesn't matter how poorly you do it. This is the great thing about the grace of God, is we can fail miserably in our pursuit of God. And in the end, if our heart is true, then we will be welcomed into His kingdom. Not because we did it all right or because we deserved it, but because Jesus stands as our advocate. This parable is not trying to teach us what heaven and hell are like, but it is teaching us the idea that wealth does not equal blessing. That is not a correlation that we should be making. Just because someone's rich does not mean they're a good person, which we feel like we know. I mean, you watch enough news to know that these guys aren't always the best people in the world, right? But there's another thing that we're going to get to in a moment. So before we get too excited about that statement, because we all like to bash the rich. Listen, if I got up here and I bashed the rich, we'd all have a really good time today. Just wait. What this parable really teaches us is that the abundant life that Jesus does promise us, Jesus does promise us that if you follow Him, there is an abundant life waiting for you. And that abundant life has nothing to do with your bank. That abundant life has nothing to do with your health. That Jesus teaches that if you have Him and Him alone, you have more than enough. That if the abundant life is that you have Jesus. And what you can realize is that you can have an abundant life and have a terminal diagnosis. You can have an abundant life and have an empty bank account because Jesus is more than enough for you. Now, this parable doesn't mention either man's faith. It's kind of a challenge for us.
We should remind you.
Because we have to assume why they ended up where they are. And this leads us to the other side of the coin. If we're not careful, we can take this parable to mean that wealth equals curse. And poverty is tithing. And that's not what Jesus is teaching. He is not teaching that if you have money, that you are sinful. He is not teaching that just because you're poor means you're righteous. This parable really isn't about the money. It's not about rich or poor. It's about what following Jesus really demands of us. What is He really asking us to do when we say, I'll follow you? We can get in a whole lot of trouble when we rail against the prosperity gospel and we say, oh, it's so sinful, and we say that wealth is evil and anyone with it is wrong and sinful. No, that's not what Jesus teaches. In fact, there were many wealthy people who funded Jesus' ministry. He probably couldn't have done what he did without them, and Paul certainly couldn't have. Paul relied on the generosity of both the poor and the rich to fund his missionary journey to spread the gospel around the world. So far be it from me to sit in judgment of other people who have more than I do and act like they're not righteous, when I have plenty and I definitely don't do the right thing with it all the time. I was studying the message from last week. I was doing a Bible study with an old kid from my youth group from back in the day. And I'll share that story with you someday. We've reconnected. We've been doing Bible study in my office. And we were studying the passage from last week, and I got really convicted by something. And I still haven't fully processed it, so I'm going to air it out there, and you guys can all judge me. Maybe you can help me with this. But I am really, really, really willing to cut costs if it benefits my budget. So recently, one of the ways I did that was I got rid of my lawn care person. And I started mowing my own lawn. Okay? I said, I'm not going to pay someone else to do something that I can do. I'm going to save that money and give myself a little bit more room in my budget every month. Now, what have I done with that extra money over the last 5-6 months? I don't know. I don't know. It doesn't seem like it's showing up in the account. Like, I don't know what's going on. I don't feel wealthier every month. But there's something I do every month that I've done since I was in college. When me and Courtney got married, we started sponsoring a child through World Vision. And so every month, $35 shoots out of my account without me even thinking about it, and it goes to provide for the basic needs of a child in another country. That child gets clean water, they get an education, they get medical care, they get clothes on their back, they get a roof over their head, their community learns how to farm and do agriculture, and I pay $35 a month. Here's my problem. We talked about storing up treasures in heaven last week and how we need to invest in eternal things. And I am really, really willing to cut costs to benefit me. I hadn't once thought that with the $120 a month that I was spending on lawn care, if I would have just taken half of that, mock all you want. Was I being ripped off? I don't know. Yeah. With half of that money, I could have saved 2 more kids every month. And it never once crossed my mind. Like, in the end, when I get to heaven, will God look at me and say, well done, good and faithful lawn maintenance guy? Will my green grass greet me at heaven's gate and say, welcome, Evan? Look at these roads lined with gold. Polish them. Or will Christ Roy meet me there? My little girl that we sponsor every month, will she meet me there? I am so much more willing to give to myself that it doesn't even, that never even crossed my mind in 5 months. And listen, every year when we do our budget for the year, I look at that $35 and there is a thought that crosses my mind. Maybe we should cut it. It goes away pretty quick, I'll be honest. It fades pretty fast. But it comes. This parable is not about rich or poor. It's about what all of us do with what we've been given. Jesus finishes the parable like this, in verse 27. The rich man said, then I beg you, Father, to send Lazarus to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, so that he may warn them, lest they come into this place of torment. But Abraham said, they have Moses and the prophets. Let them hear them. And he said, no, Father Abraham. But if someone goes to them from the dead, listen to that phrase, they will repent. And he said to them, if they do not hear Moses, and they won't listen to the prophets, neither will they be convinced if someone should rise from the dead. Verse 27 sounds like a pretty reasonable request from this rich man. I'm here now. I'm in this place of torment. Go tell my family so they don't end up here with me. We can sympathize. I feel it. I get where he's coming from. We often, I have people ask me all the time, when we get to heaven, will we get able to come back and say something to our, how can we be happy up there if we don't get to come here and tell our family? And the response from Abraham, which is interesting that it's Abraham, and again, Jesus is talking to Jewish people. He's giving them their perspective of what heaven will be like. To them, it won't be Jesus at the right hand of God. That's not their picture. It'll be Abraham there. For us, Jesus stands at the right hand of God. Jesus is our advocate. But for them, it was Abraham. And he says they have Moses and they have the prophets. What does that mean? It means we've already been told. We have the scriptures. Jesus' ideas are nothing new. He didn't come and redefine the Old Testament. He came and proved it true. He came and he showed us that if you follow God and if you do things his way, there is abundant life at the other side. If you love people and you treat people well, there's a reward for that. And no, it did not result in Jesus becoming super wealthy and living a long, fulfilling life. In fact, it resulted in him dying on a cross. But would we dare to say that Jesus did not have an abundant life? He had the Father. He had his Father so close to him that only once in his whole life did he ever feel his Father's gaze leave him. And that was when he was on that cross, taking our sin upon himself. And he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? What this rich man is doing, he's not really asking for his brothers. He's making an excuse for himself. He's saying, if only I had known what was really waiting in for me. If only I had known that what I do with my money matters, then I would have shared it, of course. Abraham's reply is he did know. This wasn't a secret. There were laws and commandments about how we treat the poor, the widow, the orphan, the stranger, the foreigner. And if we choose to ignore those things, we don't get to claim at the end, I didn't know. We need to take the words of God seriously and apply them to our lives. This rich man allowed his comfort and convenience to blind him to the needs of the world around him. This is not a parable about the sin of wealth and the piety of the poor. It's about the necessity of seeing the world through the eyes of Jesus. About going through life with open eyes and an open heart to the hurting people around us and asking ourselves, what can I do? I shared earlier that I was driving through Pahokee and I had this crisis of conscience, and I pointed the finger at the government, I pointed the finger at everybody else. I never asked, what should I do? What can I do? And part of the reason is it feels like that's too big of a problem for me. What can I do? How could I help solve the poverty crisis in America? I can't feed everyone. But the rich man in this parable wasn't called to feed everyone. He He was called to feed the person at his gate. He was called to feed the person lying at his door, suffering and dying, that he walked by every day and refused to see. I said earlier that in Pahokee, people live on about $50 a day. And for many of us here in this room, I know some of our financial situations. Some of you have shared with me what you go through, and I know that when we start talking about giving more, you would love nothing more than be able to give more. It's not a matter of, oh, I wish I could give more. It's, I have nothing else to give. It's true. But it's also not true. Half of the rest of the world lives on less than $10 a day. Half of the rest of the world, 4.5 billion people, are surviving on less than a fifth of what the people in Pahokee are making every day. 700 million people in our world live on less than $2.15 a day. And before you argue, that has already been adjusted for the cost of living. So yes, their rice might be cheaper there, but that's already been factored in. The poorest people here in this room, there are half the world would look at what we have and be appalled. They would be shocked at how well we live. You have a mattress in your home? Your roof isn't leaking water on you every time it rains? There's not rats biting your feet at night? You eat every single day? The whole family? Not just the kids? You mean the husband doesn't come home and he brings some rice and the wife doesn't cook it, and then they both pretend to eat, but really their bowls are empty so the kids don't have to feel guilty as they fill their bellies with what little they have? And you call it poverty? We can all do something. We don't all have to do the same thing. But we are all called to do something. And you know what? The story of the rich man and Lazarus is exactly the same story for them living overseas, making $2.15 a day. They are called to still try to do something with what you have. Love your neighbor as yourself. When I feel like I just can't do anything, like my giving, my generosity is just a drop in the bucket. I'm reminded of a study recently. A team of researchers did a study on what it would actually take to provide the whole world, make sure everyone in the world had the basic necessities to live. And it's around they estimate around $30 to $50 billion a year that it would take. I would write a check, but I don't have a pen. Otherwise, I just cover it. 30 to 50 billion sure sounds like a lot. But my daughter's in 4th grade, and we've been doing math, and I've learned how to do some multiplication, so I'm going to try it on you guys. This is this whole new thing they're doing in school called multiplication. I never learned it the first time. So we're gonna have some fun with numbers. Did you know the average church member in America gives about 2 to 3% of their income to church or religious organizations or causes? 2 to 3%. Only about 5%, this one blew my mind, only about 5% of churchgoers regularly tithe a full 10%. Though 87% of the same people would say that it is a biblical mandate to tithe. So we believe you should, but only 5% of us do. So just live with that reality for a second. What would happen? I'm not saying you should tithe. I don't care. I don't know how much anyone gives here. I know how much I give. That's the only one I get to know. I'm not aware of anybody's giving habits. I have no idea. So I might be talking to you this morning, and you might be saying, Evan, I'm already giving 25%. Then I'm just preaching to the choir. But my guess is that we fall somewhere in these statistics. There are some of us here who don't give as much as others. There are some of us here who can't. The reality is, I don't care if you give 1% or 10%. All I care about is that you give with a joyful heart, and you give what God has put in your heart to give. But let's just have fun with numbers and assume, what if every Christian in America gave 10%? So, you want to get your calculator out, you can check my numbers. There are 70 million Christian households in America. So 70 million people, households in America that claim to be Christian. In those households, the average household income in America is about $70,000 a year. So if 70 million households gave 10% of 70,000, that would be $7,000 per year per household. 70,000 households by $7,000, $490 billion per year. Tell me again that there's just not enough. Tell me again that there's just not enough out there for us to help people. We could meet everyone's basic necessities in the world and still have $400 million left over every year to do whatever we want.